Let's take a look at a couple more examples of product of sum simplification. So we're given this function f in terms of a, b, c, and d, but we're given it in terms of a product of max terms. So at these max terms, what we're going to load into our map is a 0. So we'll load a 0 into max term 0. We'll load a 0 into max term 2, into max term 4, into max term 8, into max term 10, and into max term 12. Now we need to simplify this function. So we'll simplify the function by covering the zeros. Well, this is going to be kind of easy to do. There isn't, a lot. So for these two, for that one at least, and this one, what we're going to use is the 4 corners. So those 4 corners, where we have B is not changing, it's a 0. We have D is not changing, it's a 0. So we'll get that F is equal to B or D. And then we have this column here, this column, and then we've covered everything once we do that. So we're going to AND this with C is a 0 and D is a 0, so we're going to use C or D, and we're done. If we were going to use the method of finding F prime, we get F prime is equal to, again, in yellow, that's going to be our B prime, D prime product term, ORed with in green our C prime, D prime product term. Then when we take the complement of that, we end up with we change the AND to OR and complement each literal, all AND stores, so we get B or D ANDed with C or D, and we get the same result both times. Or I should say, we get the same result with both methods. We expect to get the same result. All right, let's take look at one more example. In this example, what we want to do is map something that's already expressed in terms of a product of sum terms, but we want to see if we can minimize it. So we got to make sure we can map this properly. So our sum term A prime or Z, so this has got to end up being a 0, right? So that's a 0 when A is a 1 and C is a 0. So where A is a 1 and C is a 0, and again, we're going to map zeros there. So where A is a 1, that's here, and C is a 0. These 4 cells right here. So we've mapped this here. Now if we want to map our next one, this is where A is a 1, B is a 0, and C is a 1 because it's C prime. So we get a 1, 0 where C is a 1. So our 1, 0 is down here, and C is a 1 right here, right? C is one of these 2 cells. So now if we look at this, when this is a 0, that's if B is a 1, C is a 1, and D is a 0. So C is a 1 as D is a 0 here, B is a 1 in these 2 cells, and then we have B or D. So B being equal to a 1, B's got to be equal to a 0, and D's got to be equal to a 0. So B is equal to a 0 in the top 2 rows, D is equal to a 0, and so that's the 4 corners, right? So we get 1, 2, and then we get, 1 here and 1 here. We already had 1 there. So now we've mapped the function. That's key. First step, make sure we can map the function. Now let's go ahead and see if we can minimize this. Well, it looks like from this corner here, the only way to the maximum we can get is the 4 corners. So go back to the 4 corners. F is equal to B or D, and that's the same. That's from our original function as well. We haven't minimized that. What we can do now, though, is we look at this one here. Right, if we looking at this one, the only way we can map that with 4 is the bottom. So get that ANDed with A prime or B. And so now we have these 2 and these 2. So that's the only way we can get those. And that's what? That's going to give us an A is a 1, so we get A prime, C is a 0, or C. And lastly, there we get C prime or D. C prime or D. So we've minimized it a little bit. So now we have, instead of, so these two central sum terms, we've minimized those to just having 2 variables instead of 3 variables. And I'll leave it to you to try the other method of solving for the sum of products and taking the F prime in terms of sum of products and then taking the complement of that. I'll leave it to you to check to see if you get the same result that way. Whichever method you use, is as long as you get the right result.